Radfay 48, Episode 2, Out Here in the Stars, Chapter 1, Prologue. Hello again, media maven. Hello again, social media mites and mavens. James Homan here. This audiocast begins the recording of my memoir entitled Out Here in the Stars, a memory of love, loss, and learning to let go. I began this memoir 1 year after the loss of my significant other, domestic partner / longtime companion, Harold John Shepard, to a glioblastoma multiforme. Harold and I were together for almost 15 years. Those years were monogamous, HIV negative, mutually beneficial, and gloriously physical. Not without challenges, however, and filled with irony, as the beginning of the AIDS pandemic began terrorizing our community. For a little background, Harold had been raised in Mountainside, New Jersey. I was raised in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Now, these are two very different socioeconomic specs on any spectrum. Differences in our backgrounds were almost extreme. The only similarities were a mutual interest in musical theater and that neither of us had been raised with any reference for our loving same-sex relationship. Following his undergraduate degree in English from Columbia, Harold obtained his MFA, Masters of Fine Arts, in acting at Temple University, having fallen in love with Susan Browning in the original Broadway production of Company, which he saw 11 times. His interests had been lovingly supported by his family, who had been distinctly goal-directed. Because of his physical presentation, he was consistently cast in parts older than his years, like grandfathers, religious leaders, mafia dons, etc. His Broadway debut was as Jacob, the 104-year-old father of 12 biblical and very buffed sons in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Harold therefore decided to pursue his MBA from Fordham University to secure a financial future for both of us, saving his retirement for the major thrust of his theatrical career. I joked that his last name could be followed by the initials Bam Famba. Put it together. My beginnings were considerably meager in comparison. Following the obtaining of a BA degree in English from the state school, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, through which I had to work full-time to afford, I graduated into an economy that was approaching 14% unemployment in 1970. The advice of high school counselors to, quote, get a college degree to secure a better paying job, unquote, became one of the first of many myths of America of which I was to be made aware along my independent journey. That journey began 3 days after high school graduation, when I moved out of my parents' home and into grandmother's attic. Entering college, I realized that civic theater had introduced me to a joy in life I had not known possible. But growing up in the industrial mentality of southeastern Wisconsin, I chose physical therapy as my first major, rather than pursue my bliss. At my very first dance class, which was given free to the men of Kenosha Civic Theater by a very talented man and his wife who worked as choreographers and ran their dance school located in the neighboring community of Racine, I was told that I possessed more potential for dance than any student they had ever had. I was 16 years old and hadn't ever learned to process any form of encouragement or life-affirming directional assistance. Compliments, regardless of being truthful, honest, encouraging, or sincere, were not any part of my upbringing. My immediate reaction was one of suspicion. So, what's his ulterior motive? This insecurity remained with me for many years and through various types of therapy, as ego strength had never been a personal forte. I was lost, personally and professionally lost. A budding artist peeking up through the stifling smog of industrial, non goal directed, status quo middle America. It might have been scary if I hadn't been so inexperienced. So, enough of an introduction. You will find out more than you ever wanted to know as you read or listen to this reading. Please know, however, that this memoir spirals downward. Someone dies. Following that, I'm hoping you'll appreciate the upward swing of its ending chapters. I've written it all as honestly as was humanly possible for me in tribute to Harold John Shepard, a legacy to a brief life that was intelligent, talented, loving, accomplished, and exceptional in as many ways as it was generously shared by him. He was my love, and I share that with you. Should you find my efforts to be of interest, please subscribe and share this site with your friends. Although there had been, years earlier, a confrontation at a cafe in San Francisco between the gay community and their local police, it seems to have lost its significance over time. On Saturday evening, June 28th, the Stonewall riots theoretically initiated what became known as gay liberation in the United States of America. It was the same weekend that Judy Garland died of an accidental barbiturate overdose in London. As drag queens and other customers at the bar were mourning the loss of their gay icon, on Christopher Street in Manhattan's Greenwich Village, they stood up and fought back against the insistent oppression they had consistently suffered from New York City's police force. This event began an era of indescribable exhilaration and out and loud pride throughout America's gay subculture, which lasted for almost a decade. Then, the late 1970s brought with it the curse of what was initially called a gay cancer and soon identified as gay-related immunodeficiency, or GRID, the beginnings of the AIDS pandemic, which to date has yet to find a cure. Some believed this pandemic was a direct result of the sexual excesses gay men had enjoyed during the previous years. Because this pandemic initially affected two disenfranchised subcultures of American society, those being gay men and Haitian immigrants, the seriousness of the plague was intentionally downplayed by elected officials, if not dismissed and or completely ignored by those who could have made any substantial difference. Now, in the early years of the 21st century, many older gay men like myself who survived that pandemic may have found themselves, as I have, dealing with a bit of survivor guilt and a pair of quandaries. Specifically, why am I here and why did I survive? We survivors may also find a commonality in a feeling that I describe as being lost out here in the stars, in a challenging universe of changing values. The following is my attempt to deal with both that guilt and the two quandaries. You see, I found love on the battlefields of that pandemic while living on Manhattan's Upper West Side. Harold and I shared a love that was challenged in our 15th year by the fatal diagnosis of a glioblastoma multiforme brain tumor. That we remained monogamous and HIV negative were two of the many ironies we realized on our journey. This is a story that I've held in my heart for several years, with the arcs of two singular lives combining to form a circle that felt almost sacred. My hope in retelling this story is that these arcs become a whole and a part of our community's collective consciousness. My motive in sharing this is one of validation, that I wasn't placed on this planet for nothing. Wasn't there an adult in your formative years who always told you that you were better than nothing? No? Okay, so lucky you. I hope this effort proves my childhood neighbor correct. I am better than nothing. This memoir is the story of two gay men, Harold and James. We were New York theater professionals who found each other in the early 1980s, while legions of our fellow thespians, dancers, singers, directors, choreographers, agents, and casting directors were dying in astonishingly rapid succession. Similar to us, these colleagues were young gay men who were no longer living lives. By realizing their own truthful identity and choosing to live openly and authentically in a challenging world, they became pioneers, warriors, even heroes. They died, some quickly by suicide, some after swallowing a concoction of experimental remedies, all from an unknown killer. My first loss to gay-related immunodeficiency, or GRID as it was known, was the assistant choreographer on my second Broadway show. Larry McMillan died in 1980. During rehearsals the previous summer, Larry would return from his doctor's visits and show us his chest. He was having radiation treatments for this, quote, gay cancer, unquote, unquote. No one knew exactly what it was or how to treat it. Zapping various thoracic locations with radiation was Larry's doctor's choice of treatment. Larry's chest looked like a New York City subway map with assorted colors of ink indicating where and when treatment had been given. He was losing weight that he couldn't afford to lose. Tall, handsome, and talented, he was gone within a year and a half. His memorial service became the first of many I attended over the next 10 years. I stopped counting my own personal losses at 69 in 1989, a number that has not stopped increasing. GRID eventually became AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It would take local, state, and the federal government a decade longer to speak of it publicly and or print any details. Tragic devastation reigned throughout our creative community. Many gay men initially wondered if this was a population control experiment. Since Vietnam, Congress could no longer sanction undeclared wars. Was this simply another way for the older white male majority to control the threatening testosterone levels of young adult males? The silence of elected officials did nothing but perpetuate speculation and conspiracy theories, many of which were absurd. Questions went unanswered. It was terrifying to watch our many friends dying of unexplainable causes. Some committed suicide because they believed their parents would have killed them or at least disowned them if they'd admitted to being gay. The homosexual stigma of the 1970s was beyond scary. Bodies of dead gay men were being denied transportation to their hometowns for burial. Funeral homes were being boycotted when it became known that they catered to a gay clientele for fear of contamination. Because the source of this disease was unknown at first, we were required to put on bulky white paper jumpsuits with hoods before entering friends' hospital rooms. We joked about appearing to be a SWAT team or resembling the Pillsbury Doughboy as we visited these dying friends a last time in their hospital beds. Standing at the Roosevelt Hospital bedside of one friend, I heard his parents vehemently accuse his partner of killing their son. This was perhaps my most troubling experience. How does one console either side? Death was not a new experience for me. As a child, I'd lost 7 of my 43 first cousins. All my grandparents had died, and following high school graduation in 1966, school chums were being killed in Vietnam almost monthly. AIDS was more frightening, though, because no one seemed to know why. It was terrifying. The wrong generation was dying, and no one had any answers. Many of us simply waited for the next proverbial pump to drop. As a disenfranchised segment of society, gay men didn't seem to matter to the establishment. Many people who may have been able to make a difference seemed uninterested in finding a solution. The New York Times obituaries became the gay men's sports pages, and we read them as compulsively. Intrapsychically, I remain unsure how Harold and I survived the AIDS pandemic and or resolved our individual challenges. In almost 15 years, I don't remember that we ever discussed it. We tried to tune out a plague that was challenging any concept of our future. We had hopes of a future, growing old together on Cape Cod and volunteering at one of the many theaters located there. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, I worked by singing and dancing and waiting on tables, to be honest, as if nothing was wrong. In the 1990s, I transitioned into the much more antiseptic culture of corporate America, where prejudices abounded, but tacitly, and behavior loudly. Therefore, I kept my mouth shut. Harold worked an office job temporarily, choosing to stay in New York rather than be cast in summer stock musicals or national tours. Since the Stonewall riots of 1969, gay men had struggled for acceptance and the freedom in which to enjoy their civil rights, not to mention their birthright of loving and being loved. Throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, these gay warriors had truly accomplished many of their goals. For Harold and me, it was confusing to find ourselves in a loving relationship and yet feeling as if our lives could be extinguished so easily by a pandemic. Stonewall had begun a process of gays being accepted in American society, and the gay world was rejoicing in a freedom that it had so recently achieved. Luckily, we chose to celebrate with hugs at home. Harold and I lived together in a mutually beneficial, monogamous, loving, and HIV negative relationship for almost 15 years. Then, on a rainy April Fool's Day in 1998, our love was abruptly challenged with a fatal diagnosis, not of AIDS, but a glioblastoma multiforme brain tumor, medically referred to as a GBM. Definitely not the anagram for gay black male as found in personal ads of that day. The most GBMs were the most aggressive malignancy the human brain could acquire. My instincts have been telling me for years that our story is worth telling. This is a story of various truths for the two of us who, as all gay men of our generation, had been raised to live lies, not truths. The secrets of our sexuality and our pursuit of love, a birthright shared at that time by only heterosexual people. We were two men who, as were so many others, not encouraged to recognize or rely on our underdeveloped personal ego strength that might prove essential for our respective maturation. Yet somehow we found both strength and truth in our love. When I first attempted to tell our story, I couldn't get past the tears, frequently being reduced to a puddle, literally. Finally, 20 years later, I'm able to get beyond the tears, complete this circle, and tell our story. A story of one arc that began and ended in Newark, New Jersey, and my arc, which survived an emotionally abusive childhood and a feeling of being out of place in the Midwest. Those two arcs most happily combined to form a loving, complete universe that neither of us ever expected to enjoy. The center of that universe is detailed in this memoir. It's filled with tales of my being a professional dancer who chose to leave show business, and tales of my life with Harold, who maintained his goal. Our universe also includes fairly complex challenges defined by endemic medical minutiae, not unlike universal black holes, including ironies and absurdities typical of any fatal diagnosis. Our story does not mean to imply that our experience was exceptional in any way. The resilience inherent in all human spirit is universal, but how we manage to maneuver the vagaries of change may be of interest. If anything, my journey with Harold has taught me that the only element of any permanence in this life is change. Another irony. We may dedicate ourselves to a goal in life, but as individuals, we will change on our journey toward that goal. The goal itself may even change. Amidst such change, the challenge is to remain true to oneself. I trust you will find that we did exactly that. 20 years later, having relocated to Western Massachusetts, I was driving home from work one afternoon listening to a program on NPR about North American Indian beliefs. You see, my DNA results indicate that I'm 0.2% Native American. I don't recall the exact tribe being discussed or many other details of the broadcast, but what interested me most was hearing that some tribes believed anything round represented a god or gods. A circle, an orb, the sun, the earth, the crater of a volcano, a drop of mercury, the rim of a cauldron, the womb expanding inside a woman's abdomen, an infant's head, the wheel, a wedding ring, the hero's circuitous journey beginning to end. Doesn't the arc of a human life, when combined with the arc of another human life, create a circle? Beliefs, circles, beginnings and endings. If humans had been created from stardust, are we not more similar to the moon, another powerful circle, waxing and waning as personal challenges cross our daily paths? On each person's journey, their personal beliefs can and will be confronted daily by change, as if being shadowed in an eclipse. A person's truths or beliefs, as realized by any mature individual, are those for that specific individual, and possibly that individual alone. When these truths or beliefs are shared as stories, they speak of our humanity at a particular time and place. Ultimately, when they are combined, they form the story of our collective existence. While truths may differ for every individual, there are similarities to be embraced and differences to be respected. As we were experiencing the more recent epidemic with all its variants and extraordinary death toll, I thought about those years long ago. If AIDS had been taken more seriously in the early 1970s and 80s, how much more prepared would our world have been for Mother Nature's onslaught of COVID-19? She is not happy, you know. Anyway, what happens in this memoir seems so long ago. It was another life, literally a lifetime ago, but not unlike other lives in history. I hope you will agree this one life needs to be remembered. Thank you. Well, that's it for this podcast. Please check in for episode 3 as this theater memoir entitled Out Here in the Stars, A Memory of Love, Loss, and Learning to Let Go continues with an introduction of yours truly and other aspects of life in K-Town, as we affectionately called Kenosha, Wisconsin, during the 50s and 60s. And again, thanks for listening. Until next week, then, be kind, do good, be happy, and love one another, remembering to coexist with tolerance by embracing similarities and respecting differences. Thanks for listening.